much, right? And someone at some point will come up with a more innovative way to approach the customer, right? You're trying to sell fare for your cabs. Someone else is going to come up with Uber that's really talking to the customer where the customer wants to be talked to. So say all that as a little bit of background to help you think through that. And as you think about your personas, you can think about a lot of different approaches for segmentation that will help you drop them into different buckets. There's some categories here, whether it's, if you're looking at consumers, it might be generational categories. It might be potential categories like what's their total household income or what's the total revenue if it's more of a business firmographic type of piece of information. What are their preferences? What's their role in making a decision? Are they influential? Are they a final decision maker? Are they really important, but maybe not quite a final decision maker? Do they have no influence at all? And that's where we find a lot of organizations when they design their sales process ultimately find out they get a long way through what they think is the sales process, and they're not talking to someone who even influences the decision. And now they got to either go all the way back to the beginning or just write it off because that organization was not ready to buy at all and they were just talking to the wrong person. And then there's what we call RFM segments, which have been around for a long time, but they still hold true. And that's a recognition that your best prospect is always your current customer, right? So if you want to sell something, you want to look at your current customers first and say, who among those might be a good target for me? And understanding your customers to divide them into segments easily, you can think about recency, frequency, and monetary value. How recently have they purchased something, acquired something from us? How frequently on average do they engage with us? How much money do they spend when they engage with us? Recency, frequency, and monetary value. Because what we know from having done work on this all the way back into the 80s is the best predictor of future buying behavior is always past buying behavior. And you usually don't have much past buying behavior around non-customers, right? Your competitors have that, but your customers, you know. So you might have a customer who you say they buy one thing a year, but they ask for 30 quotes a year. Well, that's going to probably be treated a little bit differently than someone asks for 2 quotes a year and buys 2 things per year. That's the nature of RFM types of segmentation. And then really think about who it is you're doing this for, right? What is your target audience? Are you looking for a buyer? Are you looking a new buyer? Are you looking at an existing customer? Because that will paint your process a little bit as well. In fact, quite a bit as well. What I find is a lot of organizations focus on that new buyer persona, really important. That's coming into the top of the funnel and absolutely critical. But then they completely ignore the customer persona and realize they might be on a completely different journey, have a very different perspective on you than that new buyer. And you might have a much more effective process if you think about those as 2 separate buyer categories that you want to appeal to. So this is what a customer journey map might look like. We've actually done workshops with these, and this is actually the outcome of one of those workshops. We've got empathy maps that help you understand existing persona, customer persona, diagrams, that help you understand more statistically about what's going on with the customer, and then plugging all that into what does the journey look like for this profile customer and how might we improve the sales process to them. Once all that is done is when we say now it's time to think about looking at the sales part of the customer journey. So if you've ever done this before, you might be familiar with this. I'm not prescribing this. The whole intent here is to say there is not a one-size-fits-all process. If you turn on Dynamics 365 for sales and you turn on the default business process flow, the only thing I can guarantee you is you're going to be disappointed because that's a one-size-fits-no-one template. It's not bad. It's a great starting point. It helps you learn some things, but you want the size that fits just you. So I'm showing you a one-size-fits-no-one 6-part diagram right now just to give you a framework, a roadmap for where you are. So when you think about almost any customer journey, it starts with an early phase where they're drifting, right? They might not even know that they need your service, or they might be very happy with a competitor who provides the same thing as you. The next phase is when they become aware of you. And that might be because they're dissatisfied with something from their current provider, or they're dissatisfied with something going on in their life or their business, and they know that they need a solution for it. Something to that effect, or maybe they've just heard of your marketing material and think you might have something better to bring them. Phase 3 is when they decide I'm going to begin looking at this. Now they're probably not engaged with you. In fact, the statistics nowadays say the average buyer is something like 60 to 80% of the way through the buying process before they ever talk to you. And in fact, in many cases, before they even want to talk to you. So how do you start engaging with them? before they want to engage with you. That's where some of the digital marketing and some of the other assets around content can come in to help you begin to lay the framework for a relationship before they formally engage in a relationship. Then at some point they decide to engage, right? They issue the RFP or they call you and ask for a demo or a quote. They're getting engaged. That's phase 4. They're probably going to make a decision. They might guarantee they're going to make a decision, or they might say they're like highly likely to make a decision at that point. At some point, they convert and become a customer. They're loyal for some period of time, and hopefully they do repeat business with you. And finally, in the last stage, they become someone else's drifting or aware prospect, right? They might become at risk. They might have had a bad experience with your customer service group, or maybe your competitors out innovated you and now you need to try to catch up with them. So there's the life cycle of a customer. I put that there to say we're focused on sales, but remember, there's processes around every single one of these to make sure you capture, retain, and create longer lasting, more beneficial relationships between you and your customers. But when we look at these 6 stages and you look at CRM, these are kind of what you tend to think about in these. The very early stages, you're probably generating leads and you're doing marketing campaigns to generate some of those leads. Once those leads become qualified, then you're focused on opportunities to win business with them. And once you win them, you're probably tracking them as accounts in your system, active customer accounts, and you're tracking cases to support them with their issues and other needs. And of course, creating more opportunities, hopefully, to get repeat business with them. Now you're probably here thinking, okay, this is all about sales, and it is today. But remember, that's one part of a much longer customer journey. And when you think about sales, most people think, okay, that's the opportunity entity, that's the opportunity table in Dynamics 365, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. So we've worked with many organizations who are working, trying to make opportunities work, trying to make pipeline management work for them, only to find out that really they don't have a pipeline, right? Maybe they sell, maybe they're a manufacturer and they sell mostly through distributors. And if they just do a good job of maintaining relationships and ongoing dialogue with distributors and sharing leads with them and maybe going with them to help them through their sales process, they're going to generate more sales. But instead, they're wasting time doing something that adds friction to the sales process instead of something that's removing friction from the sales process. So very important that you understand what are the most important processes for us to define and how might those look. My assumption today is that we are here. We're going to focus on the opportunity. A pipeline management is a good thing for you to do, and so that's where we want to focus. But that was my rather long introductory way of saying that is not necessarily the best place for you to start just because that's something that's built into CRM and it looks pretty cool. Be aware of that as we get into it. Okay, so now let's assume that this is the right path for us to go down. How do we begin to build something that ultimately is going to look like this? If you're not familiar with this little process diagram at the top of the page here, this is what's called a business process flow in Dynamics 365 or any model-driven app for that matter. You can build these process flows. And a process flow basically means, hey, I've identified 4 stages. You can identify as many stages as you want, but here are the 4 stages our prospects go through on the road to becoming a customer. And if I click on any one of those process steps, I get a list of actions I need to take during that step. So you can see I'm on the proposing step right now. I've already completed the readiness assessment and the scoping step. Now I'm on the proposing step. And by the way, this has been active for 6 months. That might not be a good thing. Maybe it's been in there for too long. Here are the things I need to learn as I go through this particular step. And when I'm done, I move to the next stage and I'm in closing. Some of you may know all about that. That's great. Some of you that may be brand new to. If you already know how to work with it, that's fine. I'm not going to train you how to build these today. I'm going to train you how to work with the business to construct the requirements that you can use to build these. Building these is really not a problem. If you're already familiar with Dynamics 365 or model-driven apps and configuring tables and forms and that kind of thing, business process flows are a relatively simple learning curve. So as I give you some of these tools and I talk about, people who help to build something, support what they help to build, one of the activities that we're very keen on is what we call luck storming sessions. So luck is an acronym we use around all sorts of things we do in our business. It's basically how human relationships are done. How do you engage with your team to listen to them, give everybody a voice and helping you think through and understand what the process is? How do you actually understand what they've said? So they're not just giving you facts, but you come back to them with questions and prototypes and POCs and all sorts of things to say, let me make sure I got this right and that this is going to meet your needs. And then how do you connect all of that to actually make better decisions and build out the process? And up front, how do you understand that you're going to need to monitor this so you'll know the results? Because no matter how good of a job you do on the front end, it's going to constantly change and you're not going to have it perfectly right. You're going to continue to learn and improve as you go along. So know what the results are and continue to improve. So that's luck. Listen, understand, connect, and know. And we build that into workshops to make sure we're doing that in real time as much as possible. So here's the first thing I suggest you do with your teams. And we do this in little workshops when we get together with people as well. Bring the team together and say, look, let's start real simple. You might already have your preconceived notion around, well, here's all the stages and all that. I want you to forget about all that because I want to start from scratch. We can look at that stuff later, but let's start really simple. I'm going to put a sticky on the top of the page that says beginning, another one that says middle, and another one that says end. And what I want you to do is put stickies under that describe the customer's journey through that buying process in the beginning of the process, the middle of the process, and the end of the process. And we put other things in there to help them think, like what decisions are they going to need to make? What kinds of information do they need? What do we need to get from the customer during that process? What's the process that they're going through? And you can lay that out on something like this. This is sort of the workbook page we have where you can say, okay, here's the beginning and middle and end of the customer buying cycle. And we can also define, what are their buying stages? So this is a simple way to say, before I'm thinking very much about my process, what do I think the customer is going through? And let me just name their stages. So instead of me having a stage that says something like qualifying, proposing, and closing, that's very me-centric, right? Important, but that's business-centric. Their phases might look something more like researching, reviewing, and decision-making, or something like that. If you understand what their processes are named, it helps your people to be more in tune with what the customer is going through when they execute their process. Then you think about the needs of all the stakeholders inside and outside of your organization throughout this. I love acronyms. Here's a simple one, CUBS. So at each stage of this process, yes, what's the customer need, but what do your users need? What do the frontline salespeople need? What do their managers need and leadership need to make this work? And by the way, depending on how complex this process is, what do our systems themselves and the people who support those systems need? Do we need to integrate with something else? Do we need to add some custom thing here? Do we need them to be actively engaged in this process each time to support us in certain ways? You need to understand all those requirements for all the teams to make sure you know what it's going to take. And now you're ready to describe your beginning, middle, and end of the process. Same kind of thing, but instead of asking the customer, you're going to ask your same group, what is the beginning, middle, and end of your selling process? Now, the interesting thing about doing it this way is you might have marketing in the room and you might have a sales team that focuses on inside sales in the room, and you might have a sales team that focuses on kind of closing the deal after it's been qualified in the room. Marketing's end might be inside sales' beginning, right? So we don't worry too much about that at this point, right? It's like just everybody put your beginning, middle, and end where you think it belongs. We're not going to care that there's overlaps yet. We just want to get as much information down as possible before we start making preconceived notions about how to name these and divide these things out. So now that you've done that, let's back up a second and talk about the difference between sales and some other things you might do. I know we've probably got a somewhat technical audience today. We might also have some business audience folks as well, maybe some business analysts who sit between them. So in classic legacy business, processes look like this. They're more like train tracks, right? It's sort of we've defined what the process is, the train is on the train tracks, and are there switching stations to make decisions? Sure. Can we make changes to the process? Yeah, but that's pretty significant surgery because you know what? We don't want to get too creative with operations when we're manufacturing things. And we don't want to get too creative with finances, right? Those lead to mistakes, they lead to ethical problems, they lead to all sorts of things. It's important to have these very static, hardcore tracks that certain processes are on. But for more people-centric processes that we're coming up with today, whether they're sales or otherwise, we need something else. Now, unfortunately, your sales team might feel it's more like this. It's the Wild West. It's every person for themselves. Get on your horse. There's no tracks. Heck, there's not even any paved roads. Figure it out. Lasso those doggies or whatever it is that cowboys do, and bring them back. But that's almost no process at all. So what you're really looking for is the balance between those two things. You're looking at this saying, look, there are accepted norms for how this gets done. There's a network of paved roads out there, but we need the right kind of equipment, the right kind of process that allows our people to navigate those roads with a tremendous amount of agility. It's not a train where you just throw coal into the engine and you kind of barrel straight ahead at top speed with a lot of momentum. Instead, the customers always throw the curveballs at you. There's some new thing you didn't know about. There's lots of permutations in product design that you can think through, and you need to be able to quickly navigate those changing roads. But there are roads, and you need to understand what they are while giving people the flexible freedom to navigate them. What we like to say is they're like a wheel. They're rigid at the core. There's certain things they always need to do. In fact, I might be stealing a slide here, but you want to find things that are rigid at the core, meaning they have rims. It's processes that are repeatable, improvable, measurable, and scalable. That's the rigid core. If you don't have a rigid score, you lose rims, right? They're no longer repeatable. You can't make improvements if it's so flexible that everyone's doing it different ways. How are you ever going to measure something that is done differently by 5 different people? And you want it to scale. So if I've got 20 salespeople and I want to move sales by 5%, I don't need to hire one person for every 5%. I can hire one person and get 10% growth because it can scale. I can do more with less is essentially what scalable means. So how do we do that? Every stage of your sales process. Remember, right now we're still in this beginning, middle, and end, very simple process. Every stage of your sales process has 4 Ds. You're going to look at data. What data do I need to capture? What data do I need to make available? What data will I need for the next step? There's decisions you're going to make and decisions that the customer is going to make. Usually those decisions are driven on the data, right? If the data says the customer's budget is half of what product XYZ costs, you need to decide, are we still going to propose product XYZ? Do we have another product that fits? Or are we going to disqualify? Those are the kinds of decisions you need to make. The customer is going to need to make decisions as well. There's deliverables. What am I going to deliver to aid with all of that? Am I delivering a quote? Am I delivering a fact sheet? Am I delivering an ebook to help them understand things better? What are the deliverables we're going to deliver? And what deliverables are we going to require from the customer? This is often missed by sales teams because they're so focused on, I just want to get the customer as far as I can through the pipeline as possible. But really, a much more successful sales pipeline says, I want to get the customer out of the pipeline as soon as I can if I'm sure they don't belong in it, because there's plenty of other customers I can go to, and it's a waste of time to sell to a customer that's never going to buy from me. It's a waste of their time. It's not respecting their time and values, and it's a waste of your time as a company and as a sales team. So one of the deliverables you're going to ask for from a customer generally is a commitment at each stage. I'm going to commit to get this for you. Are you going to commit to review it and approve it? Are you going to commit to getting a team of decision makers together so that we only have to do this once? Deliverables. And then development. How are we going to measure this to continuously improve it? And that's the part that everybody leaves out. We get so busy running the vehicle down the road that we forget to check the gas tank. We forget to check if it's overheating. We forget to check if we can run it more efficiently. If you do this up front and understand the simple variables, your sales leadership starts to have tools to say, this step is taking too long. This person is much more effective than others. What can we learn from them to do this better? Things don't close as well if this happens. You can start to develop this and continuously improve it. And if that sounds familiar to you, it's what we talked about earlier. Really, the 4 Ds are another way of saying, how are we going to listen to each other? How are we going to deeply understand and make better decisions? How are we going to connect with each other so we're giving each other deliverables we need? And how are we going to know what the results are so we can continuously develop and improve the process? Remember that that's a matrix. So you thought about beginning, middle, and end. The 4 Ds, or listen, understand, connect, know, you'll apply to each one. Coming up in one slide, we'll look at that. Now, as you think about your phases, there's a lot of science to this. We've got beginning, middle, and end right now. What I challenge you to do is say, find what is the center of your sales stage. And this is where you might pull some things out of scope completely, right? You might have 5 stickies at the top and kind of go, look, these things I thought about, they're not really part of this particular process. Not saying they're not important, but they're not part of this process. We're going to put them in the pre-sales process. And these things that we talked about also important, but they're really after the sales process. Maybe it's, getting them entered into the accounting system or starting the operational project for them or whatever it is. So now we've got just the things in the middle that we say this is truly the entire process we're going to look at. And now we're going to name our stages. Now, what I suggest, I don't see everyone do this, and it's not a huge sin, but I find, especially for early adoption, it can help. What I suggest is you look for a ing ending in most cases. You can see I broke the rules a little bit here, but something that communicates this is a stage, it is not a step. So I see a lot of organizations who will say something like proposal is a middle step. And that sounds like a checkbox, right? It's like I created the proposal. That's one thing. It's not proposing, where I've got a lot of things to do around creating the proposal, shopping the proposal internally, proofreading the proposal, giving the proposal to the customer, and getting the proposal approved. That's proposing, right? It's around a proposal. So what you want to look for is naming your stages and then having a very, very crystal clear definition for what each stage means. Here's what I mean by that. If you have a stage that says something like qualifying, connecting, and completing or something like that, which one are you in? How do you know? You might have an optimist who says you're in stage 3. You might have a pessimist who says you're in stage 1. You need something that's completely data driven that says, I can ask you 2 questions without you telling me what stage this is in, and I can tell you what it's in based on those questions. So what we have found is if you have a 3-stage process, more on that in a bit, the middle defines the beginning and the end. What I mean by that is if you have a really, really well-defined middle, by definition, you define the beginning and the end too. Here's what I mean by that. Quoting or proposing or estimating. Those are all great names for a middle stage, and usually in a sales process, that's essentially what the middle stage is. What you're really saying is, let's use proposing, for example. What you're really saying is, once I've started the process of writing the proposal or have committed to starting that process, I am in the proposing stage. And I stay in that stage until the second the client approves the proposal. Then I'm in the final stage. If that's the definition, it makes it really clear. If you're not yet ready to start writing that proposal yet, you're not in that stage. You're in the qualifying or the needs analysis stage. And if you've got that proposal approved, you're not in the proposing stage anymore. You're in the closing or negotiating stage. Now, don't take that as the prescription, right? I like to give you the broad strokes, but adapt, don't adopt. Take this thinking of have a clearly defined middle to come up with the beginning and end, and then you figure out what your middle is. Your definition might be a little bit different than mine, but as long as it's clear, you're going to be much more successful. If it's not, you're probably wasting your time. If you can't get your sales team consistently putting things into the right stage based on science, based on data, then you're going to have a really hard time making this process improve things very much at all. You may as well just have a blank opportunity form with just some fields to fill in without these stages, because the stages aren't going to add a lot of value to the process. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with the vocabulary around this, here's a quick vocabulary lesson. When we typically look at business process flows, or you think about sales process design, or really almost any business process design, you can think of stages as kind of the big thing that multiple tasks happen in, right? A stage is not usually, something that happens for a split second. It's usually something that requires some time. It's almost a little project within the bigger project, right? An opportunity is really a project. It's a project about engaging with a customer to create a sale. And within that project, you've got some smaller projects like needs analysis, quoting, and closing to help you do that. Within those stages, within those mini projects, you have steps you do. Those steps might just be checklists that show up. They might be a date you need to fill in. It might be information you need to gather. And some of those steps are required. So you have to do that step before you can go on to the next stage. That's called a stage gate. So when you think about a required field on a form, if you create a form in any kind of database application, including Dynamics, you put a required field on that form and it says you cannot save this record until you've populated that field. Well, the problem with opportunities are there's a lot of fields that are going to be required at certain parts of the project process, but not up front, right? So for instance, how much do we think the customer is going to invest in this? I may have no idea. I might have just had an initial cursory conversation and I know what it's going to cost, but I don't know what they're willing to spend. And yet that's now a required field. When you do that, what do you get in that field? Estimates, junk, $1, whatever it is, something that's not necessarily very helpful. But if you say, look, during the proposal stage, you better know how much the customer expects this to be because you're writing a proposal and that's going to help you. So while that might be on your opportunity form that they can fill in anytime they want to, in your business process flow, you're going to make it in stage 2 and you're going to require it. It's going to be a stage gate. Look, you've given them a proposal. It's got to have a number on it. Before you say they've accepted the proposal, you should be able to fill in that field. But if you don't and you say go to the next stage, it's going to go, I can't go to the next stage, right? I'm still in this form. This opportunity is still saved, but you're stuck on this stage until you tell me what it is that needs to go in this field. So that's a stage gate. Now, you see I've only got one highlighted in this whole flow. What I would tell you is sales, unlike other things, you probably don't have a lot of required fields. Maybe on average one per stage for someone to get through the process, because there's a lot of information you may never really know, or checklist items you may not need. Like I've created a list of all competitors. The customer has told me I'm not going to tell you the competitors are because that's our policy. Well, what am I going to do with that, right? If it's required, I'm just going to check it off and it's going to be meaningless information. So think through those carefully to make sure you make the right ones stage gates and the right ones optional. I referred to this earlier. I call this the 3-stage rule. What I mean by this is what I and our organization strongly recommends for any brand new sales process, or if you've had to go back and re-engineer overly complex sales processes, is try your absolute hardest to make your process only 3 stages, not 4, not 2, not 5, only 3 stages. The reason is, remember I said the middle defines the beginning and end. As soon as you add another stage, well, that rule doesn't really work anymore, right? You got to do a little more work to figure out what are the clear definitions for each one of these things. It also keeps the process a lot simpler. Look, a sales rep, they're a people first personality type, right? They don't want to spend a lot of time in technology. It should be something that assists them with the process, but gets out of their way as much as possible. And I get that the system is also there largely for leadership and management, and that's incredibly important. But if I'm a sales rep and I log into an opportunity, and every one of my opportunities has 8 stages, and I got to scratch my head every time I look at it and try to remember which one this thing goes into, I'm just going to give up. I'm not going to do that anymore. So you want to keep that really few steps, easy for them to learn, quick snap. I know exactly where this goes. I can go update that, and I don't have to be in here 5 days a week just reviewing all my top opportunities to see if they've moved up or not. Fewer updates for sales to make in that case. And remember, you might think this is painfully simple. I know our process is more complex than this. It's okay to later make it a little more complex, and I'll talk some about that. But what I can tell you is this: most of our projects we do are rescue projects. We're coming into someone who's saying people aren't using this well enough. The data is not accurate enough. We've got poor adoption, whatever it is. And I've never had to help someone because they oversimplified, right? In 100 cases out of 100, there's something that's been made more complex than it needs to be, and I've got to simplify it. It's easy to start simple and add complexity. It's really difficult to try to build out a really complex model and then later come back and say, well, let me just shave a few things off of it to make it simple again. That doesn't work very well. So cringe because you feel like it's a little too simple. That's good. If you think you might cringe at all because you think it's too complex, it's absolutely positively too complex because you, the designer, you have an appetite for way more complexity than your users are going to have. Okay, and I talked about luck, right? The 4 Ds. So now you want to build that into your sales process. You have an idea of what your 3 stages are, and you have a vague idea of what's going on inside of each of those stages. And now what you're going to do is you're going to align those in a matrix. So you've got your stages across the top, right? Needs analysis, quoting, and closing, for example. And now for each one of those stages, you're going to take all those different things you said happen, and you're going to say, all right, are each of those things about listening and gathering data? Are they about understanding, analyzing, and making decisions? Are they about connecting and giving people good deliverables? Or are they about measuring and knowing? And when you fill out that matrix, you'll find there's going to be a lot of gaps there. You'll all of a sudden go, wow, this stage, there's only one piece of data and nothing else in that stage. The first question you'll need to ask is, do we even need that stage? Can we combine it with something else if it's that simple? Or have we properly vetted that stage? Do we really understand what's going on? Now, what I can tell you is there's usually a few gaps in the first three categories here, but almost always at the bottom where you want to measure each stage, there's almost always gaps there. There are almost always gaps there. Very few people, especially salespeople, think about how am I going to measure each stage of this process so I can see what's going on and so I can continuously make improvements to it. So you're probably going to invest some time there, scratching your head thinking about it, and at least coming up with a first round, knowing that you'll improve that over time. And then you name your stages, which I talked about in the previous slides. If you hadn't named them yet, you'll come up with your final names here because now you'll have all the content underneath each stage to say, here's exactly what's going on in each one of these stages. Now, the next thing, and not everyone does this right away, but you may want to look at is how am I going to use these stages to forecast? And that's really the power of having a sales pipeline, right? It's starting to look forward because if you have a sales pipeline and it's accurate, you're starting to manage your business by looking out the front windshield of your car instead of the rearview mirror about what happened yesterday. When you drive a car, I mean, really, do you want to spend more time looking out the front window or the rear view? Of course, you want to be more front window focused. What I can tell you is if you've got stages, they're well defined and your people are trained to put the things in the right stages at the right time. It might take a little while to accumulate enough data, but you will actually be able to run reports to say, I know within a 5% margin of error, how many of these deals are going to close in stage 1 and in stage 2 and in stage 3. And it always goes up, right? So you might say when they're in the first stage, 10% of them make it all the way through to closing. But once they get into the second stage, 35% of them make it all the way through to closing. And once they're in the final stage, 73% of them make it all the way through. And you can put those numbers in there. Now, when you first start, you may not have those numbers. You may need to run the reports later. That's fine. You can put estimates in there, but that starts to help you then risk adjust your pipeline. So when someone says, hey, my goal is $500,000 a year and I got $1 million pipeline, I'm great. Well, yeah, but you know what? On average, they're 33% likelihood to close. So you really have a $333,000 pipeline and you're going to miss your goal. You either need to look at how you're going to move a lot of those opportunities up to raise a percentage, or you need to look at how you're going to put some new things in the top of the funnel to make your number. So all of a sudden it changes that conversation a little bit. Similarly, it's great to have an idea of the number of days that things are likely to stay in each stage. Not only because you'll have an idea of your whole sales velocity, right? Sales velocity is basically the total dollar in sales deals, the number of them you close as a percentage, and the amount of time it takes to close them. When you look at all that, you can start to come up with some real interesting scores for yourself around what exactly is the value of my pipeline 3, 6, or 9 months from today. Really cool stuff. And again, you can run reports that will tell you pretty definitively, I mean, unless you're only dealing with 2 or 3 deals a year, and usually if you're so big that you're dealing with 2 or 3 deals a year, you probably are dealing with an aftermarket sale because you're selling something like airplanes or factories or something where you have very few of those on the front end. But on the back end, you've probably got an aftermarket sales pipeline where you're doing tens of thousands of things a year, and that's where you can get more predictability around that pipeline. So those things are good to guess out on the front end, run reports, and get very exact with on the back end. And then you can start to run reports on salesperson A does better in this segment than others, or salesperson C does worse at this time than others do. And you can start to bring people together to go, why is salesperson A doing better? Let's understand what their process is. And now that we have a process we can tweak and feed into, we've got the rigid center, but the flexible external, the tire outside of that rigid core, so we can make tweaks to improve it for everybody. And we talked about stage gates. So as you think about each stage, you'll also want to think through, well, what are my gates going to be? What things are going to be required for my users to do before they can move from one stage to the next? If you're not sure, if in doubt, do not make it required. Nothing is worse for a salesperson than saying, I can't use this thing because it's requiring me to put something in here that I just don't know yet. And so they give up or they put bogus data in it. You're going to be much better off dealing with salespeople who just move it through the stages without putting anything in it, gradually understanding that and training them to put something in some of those and making a few of them required later, than making a bunch of them required and frustrating everybody so that now when you try to ease up a little bit, they're so disengaged, you're going to have a harder time training them. So start with very few things required. If you've got a few mandatories, that's fine, and maybe add some more later if you need to. And remember this, with all of this, right? People have been engaged, hopefully, throughout this process. You've had them with the beginning, middle, and end, and they've listed things out. They've divvied them up into different categories and helped to name them. Remember that you've got probably a larger team you're dealing with, and they need to understand why you're asking for this. So a gal named Jane McConnell did a bunch of research on digital workplace change management and adoption. The number one factor she found that made the difference between succeeding and struggling with changing behavior around digital changes, including CRM, was if people understood and bought into the why, they were much more likely to do the work. So if your sales team feels like the why is management wants new reports, that's not going to be helpful, right? So part of why might be that, and that's okay. It's okay to be transparent about that. But people want to know your favorite radio station, WIIFM, what's in it for me? So you need to define your why at multiple different levels. And one of the levels ideally is for the person, because what you're saying is, I'm going to require extra work of you to put it in here. Well, why? What am I going to get out of this? Well, how about if your pipeline becomes much more predictable, and now you're going to have a much better chance of actually making your goal and actually getting that full commission you want? That's a pretty good why, but it takes some extra time. What about if by all of us doing this, you're going to learn some things that your peers are doing, they're going to improve your results. So you're going to actually make a better commission. That's a pretty good deal. There's a huge list of those things you can constantly look at to help people understand. And no, you want to define it, you want to explain it, and you want to be a marketer. You want to be an internal communicator. Anything a communicator will tell you, if that's one thing, it's people don't hear your message until they've heard it about 20 times. So get ready to get sick of the sound of your own voice. But as someone who's helping to implement this, you need someone on your team. It might be you, it might be someone from internal communications, it might be a fan on the sales side of the shop that likes this stuff, to be able to say, I like communicating, and I'm going to help put this in writing, put it in Microsoft Teams, put it out on Yammer, stick it into emails, put banners up on walls, mention it in every single meeting we have until people have it absolutely written in the tablet of their heart. I know why we're doing this, I get it, and I'm committed to it. Okay, so all of that seemed like a lot, but that's the tip of the proverbial iceberg, right? We just hit the very, very high steps, high level stuff. I've got a few slides I'm going to share with you here. These are also represented in the workbook. If you want to get a copy of that, again, I'll give you a link to my info so you can get it. Remember that there's a lot more options out there around automation than just business process flows. And in fact, they've become very rich and powerful. So what I showed you is just the beginning of what you can do in a BPF or business process flow. But you've got all sorts of tools in the Dynamics 365 and Microsoft 365 tool set, not to mention the oodles of third parties that have other things out there to make your process work better too. So understand that you're doing more than just the sales process. There might be other pieces of this you automate. Maybe you've got a document you do mail merge with to easily create the proposal or something like that. Maybe you've got a really sophisticated set of 10 documents you select from based on questions they answer in the first stage of the business process flow, and it automatically says, I know which one of these 10 you need based on the document, based on the answers to those questions in the process flow. And now when it selects it, it mail merges information in from the opportunity and the account record to make the data entry easier, and saves it in the right place of SharePoint to save them the work from doing that as well. So there's a lot of things you can do beyond just the business process flow. Think through those things and use the right tool in the right time. Remember to keep engaged with your folks, and remember I talked about the metrics at the end, right? That the K, know the results and continuously improve. One thing we found worked really well is figure out which things the user, the rep, has 100% control over, and make sure you measure those. What I mean by this is if you say close rate, the rep does not have 100% control over a close rate, right? The organization might raise their prices and now close rates are much lower no matter what they do. But the rep does have 100% control over how many times they contact the customer throughout the opportunity lifecycle. I can always pick up the phone. I can always track another email. And if we know those are KPIs that actually lead to more closed sales, that's something I can do. At a human level, explaining it differently, I have some control over my weight, but not direct control. So I can do a lot of things to control my weight and be really frustrated. Or I can say, look, the KPI is raise my heart rate for 20 minutes, at least 5 days a week. I have 100% control over that. I might need to reprioritize some things, but I can make that absolutely happen. And if I know that that gets to the end results I want, that's powerful. We call that a SQAG, a small, quickly attainable goal, not a KPI, but a SQAG, something that I can measure at least on a weekly basis to make sure I'm tracking it, and something I have 100% control over. That's a lever you can pull to say what's working, what's not, with actually closing more deals faster than we were before. And then understand Dynamics has a bunch of great dashboard charts built into it, but it doesn't always do a great job of managing the data to give sales managers and sales reps the information they need to really see the full picture. And what I mean by that is essentially whenever you look in Dynamics, particularly at the opportunities, you're looking at a snapshot. You're saying, how does my pipeline look now? But you don't know how your pipeline has changed over the last week or month or year. And you don't know, well, if my pipeline looks this way now, how did it look a year ago? Am I on track to be as good or am I not? What you're missing is time series types of data, right? It's the kind of data that tends to be in accounting systems because they're very transactional rather than snapshot oriented. There are ways to do that. Start with baby steps. There are some powerful reports you can pull out of Dynamics just with the data that's in there. Make sure you get your head around that so that your sales managers and your sales team can use that to make better decisions, to be more aware of what's going on. But understand this is the first step of a journey. I've got another session where I outlined about 5 different generations of analytics that you'll go through as you get more mature with measuring your opportunities. And some of those are going to require things like adjusting how you're actually capturing data, whether it's in Dynamics or in a Power BI type of data lake or some combination of the two, so you can see more point in time information over time. And then you may think, well, what about stages? What if I need to add a new stage? So remember that, that you can do this, but be careful about adding it, right? So first of all, ask yourself, is it a stage, is it a step, or is it a completely different process? So it might be, well, this really isn't a stage. I can just add a checkbox under an existing stage, or tell the user to put a date in under that stage or something like that to capture what I need. Or it could be you're trying to adjust it to something that's really a whole separate process. And if you say, okay, if I take our current process, make a copy of it, but then tweak it for just this one other thing that we also need to do, might make more sense to have 2 whole different process maps for this. Does it always occur or does it sometimes occur? Are you managing to the exception instead of the rule and just making it more complicated? In other words, will it create friction or will it help you reduce friction in the sales process? Because you want this to be as friction-free as it can be. And do remember, you can even do optional stages. So for example, you might have seen in one of my charts, it showed a grayed out stage. That stage only shows up if I say, I need to give this customer a discount. In that case, it creates a new stage saying, I need a manager to approve this discount. That might be an instance where you do have a new stage, but it only shows up at certain times. Some other follow-up things on this, if you want to go deep with defining each stage of your process, we've got big 11 by 17 worksheets or PDFs that you can print out 11 by 17 to help you walk through a detailed listing of everything you want to think about for each stage. So you would fill this worksheet out, a blank version of it out, for each stage of your sales process once you define it. So I hope, if anything, you picked up that the technology is cool. I love working with the technology. I'm configuring it all day, every day. Sometimes it feels like, but it's not about the technology. Relationships for successful sales and any successful customer facing process. It's really built at the intersection of personality, people who are meant to do it, the right persona types, and process, people who can come along them and understand these very human processes that are a little bit different from rigid legacy task first processes and make that happen for them. So I'm going to wrap up. It looks like I might have a minute or two for questions, but everyone's probably exhausted. So here's some resources. If you want the slides, if you want some of the resources I mentioned today, just let me know. There's my contact information. I'll be happy to get that to you. If you want a book that explains this entire process in more detail, A coworker, Tricia Desso-Cox, wrote a book called Revenue Engineering, which basically gives you a lot more detail on this. It's on Amazon, but I'll tell you what, if the first two people, if you want it, if you email me and say, give me the Revenue Engineering book, I'll get you a free copy of it. I'll ship it off to you, but only the first couple of people. I don't want to wind up in the debt bank because I give away too many of them. But if not that, you can go grab it on Amazon. We've also got some other ebooks out there like CPR for CRM. If you're in a CRM initiative and you're struggling with it, that's a great guide to help you think about recovery. And if you like the idea of luck, I got stickers for you. You can stick it on your computer and someone goes, what does powered by luck mean? You can say, it means how I'm going to help us sell better. I'm going to help people listen, understand, and connect and know people better. Happy to get you a copy of that sticker if you want to. Again, send me your mailing information. I'll drop a couple of them in the mail to you. Thanks everybody for coming. Thank you for including me at the end of a very long day. Really enjoyed speaking with you, and I'll stick around for a few minutes. If anyone has any questions, happy to take them.
Well, thank you, Jeff. Wow. So, Jeff, I think what you really nailed in your session was the importance of putting people and processes before the technology, right? And that's exactly what you showed how to achieve through the sales process. So often you see failed implementations where they start with a technology first. You've actually addressed it in the correct manner. So I want to thank you for sharing your insights and your experience with the community to help ensure that people are actually implementing truly customer relationship management and customer experience solutions versus simply just installing an application, right?
Absolutely. I'm glad that you picked up. My mission is accomplished. That is the message I wanted to make sure I got across. And I know we've got a lot of smart technical people here, hoping to give them a few tools to help them apply that to engaging with their teams to be even more effective.
Thank you so much, Jeff. So 1 minute left for any questions. There's lots of great feedback. Debbie Giles says, always a great presentation, Jeff. Namisha saying, thank you. Edward Harif, excellent job. Great pleasure to have you here today, Jeff, on the first day of the Dynamics 365 Bootcamp. It's a great pleasure to host you. I've shared your contact details in the chat. Don't forget, don't miss out on Jeff's kind offer. Feel free to get in touch with him. And Jeff, I hope to see you in person very soon.
Hope so too as well. Thanks again for including me. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much, Jeff. So there you have it. A great way to wrap up the day for today. It's been a long day for a lot of you here today. So I just want to thank you all.